I'm Rob Trzynski. This is Symposium, where we talk about the ideas at the basis of a free society. My guest today is Shay Khatiri, who is a senior policy analyst at the Jewish Institute for National Security of America, also now a columnist with Daily Beast. Thanks for coming on, Shay.
Hey Rob, it's great to be with you again.
All right, so I wanted to have you on because you've been writing a couple things recently on a topic that fascinates me, which is the decline of religiosity in Iran, despite or perhaps because of four decades of theocracy. So I want you to sort of go over, for those who aren't following this, to go over the sort of signs of, despite this being a religious regime that is there supposedly to defend and protect and promote religion, that Iranians have actually become precipitously less religious.
Uh, so I like to joke that Germans are the most immoderate people on earth. They decide to become militarist and they go to the extreme, and then they decide not to be militarist and they become the most annoying pacifists on earth. Iranians are the same. In 1979, they decided to have a religious government, and or they resented the growth of secularism, and they decided to have a religious government. They have grown to hate it, so they don't just want to have a secular government, but also they want to punish the mosque. And what it comes from is so first let me go through some numbers for you before going into the causes. There is one political science center in the Netherlands that does public opinion in Iran, and that's the only one that we can deem reliable because it doesn't engage with regime's censorship, and it showed that around a third of Iranians identify themselves as Shiite Muslims. This is a country that that used to be up to 80% Shiite Muslim. The number of Sunnis has not declined, or at least certainly not much. It shows that it is the state religion that is declining, not just religiosity. It's, by the way, it's somewhat similar to the United States, that the decline in religiosity is really not a decline in religiosity. It's a decline in evangelical Christianity and Catholicism. Mainline Protestantism has risen, the percentage of however small they are. Small religions like Judaism or Islam or LDS Church has in fact increased a little bit. So in the United States, we don't have established religion, but the two religions that dominate politics have declined. So in Iran, it's the same. The state religion has declined. A third identify as such. More than half identify as some sort of without religion, atheist, agnostic, spiritual, without religion, and 7% identify as Zoroastrian. Granted, Zoroastrians constitute less than a percent of the population, and they don't accept converts. So these are people who just want to claim their Iranian heritage over their Islamic heritage. They just want to say we are Persians, not Muslim, despite probably not knowing anything about Zoroastrianism. So why is it? In 1979, when you had the Islamic Revolution, it was a result of many factors, but one big factor was land reforms that the Shah implemented, and much under the influence of the Kennedy administration, whom he hated. He implemented land reforms that to basically empower the peasants. What it led to, as Rob, you and I know, states state dictated policies often have unintended political consequences and economic and societal consequences. What it caused was these peasants who were quite religious became unemployed because they didn't know how to use the land. So they sold their lands and moved to larger cities looking for work. And it led to one, unemployed young men in the cities looking for jobs, being resentful, and two, a clash of culture, sudden influx of religious men into large cities who were suddenly, for the first time, seeing things they did not recognize in their country, such as boyfriends and girlfriends kissing in public, drinking, things that we associate with normal life in the United States. And they had no idea that this existed in Iran. And to push back against that. And in the meantime, there are also some liberalizing policies being implemented, like allowing women to vote, such policies. They did not have any other way than a revolution, essentially, to channel their political resentment. There is no parliament to vote for, right? Under the Shah or now, there is no meaningful one to effect change. So they decided to have an Islamic revolution. Islamic revolution comes, and by the way, what I mentioned, there was a rise of secularism, but at the same time, in reaction to it, there was an intensification of religiosity. What happens after 1979 is Iranians see the government and mosque as one. And that they begin to see that there is increased oppression in their lives. Oppression goes beyond political oppression to societal oppression. Societal orthodoxy that for the first time in Iran being enforced, not for the first time in Iran, but most severely in Iranian history, is being enforced by government under the guise of religion. And they grow to, and economic problems are rampant, have been rampant for 40 years. In fact, Khamenei, the supreme leader, just gave a speech and said the economic problems that today exist are still relics of the Shah era. Like, dude, it's been 45 years. So it might be a bit of a stretch, but Iranians saw that their problems are increasing. They began to blame politics, and the mosque controlled the politics. So they began to control the mosque. And because of that, they are growing increasingly resentful of the mosque because of that. You see nowadays, by the way, a few more pieces of evidence for secularism is one, everybody has a dog in Iran nowadays. And dogs are religiously by nature dirty. So you're not supposed to have them as pets in Islam. Everybody has dogs. Another one, and by the way, the regime has tried very hard to prevent dog ownership. It's still illegal. They still do every now and then. They just grab dogs on the street and go out and kill them. The pets, not street dogs. These are pets, people's pets. Yeah.
Funny you mention that, because in movies there's sort of a trope of it called kicking the dog, that if you want to show that the bad guy is a bad guy, if you want to really set up as evil, you show him kicking a dog, right?
Yeah.
Who would kick a dog? That's the worst kind of person, and that's like official regime policy.
Yeah, it's just monstrous. And the other one is fertility rate among Iranian women is 1.7. The only only religious society, somewhat religious society, but the only society that is still seriously practicing religion with a high fertility rate. Excuse me, the only advanced society with high fertility rate is Israel, and that's because they're religious, among other reasons. Low fertility rate is a sign of irreligious societies, and it is quite obvious that there's a huge connection between decline of fertility rate among Iranians and decline of religion. So as I mentioned, Iranians cannot there's another instance that people go around and flip the turban of the clerics on the street and film themselves and distribute it, and their parents proudly distribute it. I have a friend whose father is a septuagenarian, and for religious holidays, it's common among Shiites that you go and if you have a wish from God, you pledge that if your wish is granted, you go and distribute some form of charity, usually food, among the poor. And this guy had this, it's called Nazr. This guy had this Nazr, and he would go and distribute food every year, once a year, in his small hometown from Tehran. He would travel, distribute it. The septuagenarian man, his son sees that he's not doing it this year. He asks, "Dad, what happened? Why are you not doing it this year?" He's 76 something. And am I allowed to curse here? Because I'm coding. So he says, "Son, after these many years, I have come to realize that these things are all bullshit." So when you lose religion at 70 something, something has gone very, very, very wrong in the society. And not just this one instance, many people are losing religion. I see it among my relatives, my family, my immediate family were never religious, but I see it among others. So something has gone wrong in the society that suddenly nobody wants to be religious. And part of it is a political signal also, that you're embarrassed to be associated. Even if you're religious, you don't show it outwardly because you're embarrassed to show that you're religious, because that means you're associated with the government that is killing your neighbor.
Now, is this just simply a mere political reaction? And I think there's a lot of lessons in that to begin with. That when religion gets involved in politics, then it suffers the ups and downs of politics. It doesn't, there's a very good case that the best thing for religion is to stay above politics and not get involved in the partisan battles. But is there also something else about the religion itself sort of seeming like a fraud, that when people see it put, as fully into sort of fanatical action, that they see, wait a minute, this isn't what it promised to be?
It's funny because we've seen this with the Catholic Church in the medieval era, in ancient and medieval era, right? That to politics is an earthly matter. Religion is a heavenly matter. That's how it works. So I coded in a piece for Providence magazine called Integralism, Christian and Islamic. I coded the late great Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, who says the two cannot mix because compromise is a necessity in politics and is sin in religion. And what you see is that in most countries that integrate politics and religion, politics increasingly becomes absolutist and religion becomes compromising. suddenly.
Well, and that's actually, from my study of this, that's actually built into the Khomeinist system. In that, so I found the fascinating thing that the thing that sort of ties Ayatollah Khomeini and Osama bin Laden together is they both had a theory in which basically the needs of politics become a source of religious doctrine. And I'm trying to remember the name of it in Persian. That there's a name of this doctrine in Khomeini's theory that's like it translates as the needs of the regime. That because it's important, because basically it says because religion dictates you have to have an Islamic regime, therefore anything necessary to prop up the regime is sanctioned by religion, and it becomes just a way in which basically, instead of politics being, in theory, politics is being dictated by religion, but in practice, religion is dictated by politics.
It becomes, yes, you have to excuse religious compromises you make. There is a fascinating memorandum of conversation from the office of Khomeini leaked over the weekend. And it's probably the first time that we have seen how the core of the regime talks, especially from the recent protests. It's from January 3rd. And these are senior IRGC members who are meeting with Khamenei to talk about the problems that are happening. There's one cleric. It's fascinating, just mind-blowing. But and listeners can look to JINSA, where I work, Jewish Institute, because I'm going to publish some stuff about it if they're interested. But there's one cleric who's a senior IRGC cleric, and he's talking and he says he's advocating for some reforms so they could keep the country together, essentially. And he says, we're already making compromises on religion. If we had absolute Sadr Islam, absolute religious doctrine from the beginning of Islam, like the Prophet himself, we'd have to execute everyone. If you want to be absolutist, go ahead, destroy the entire country. Or we have already made compromises. Let's make a few more compromises. But what's fascinating to me is that a cleric is not supposed to say, let's make compromises on religion for the sake of politics. You're not supposed to say that. I understand that he's saying that we cannot kill the entire nation. But if you're an honest cleric, you either have to say that, no, this is not true Islam, or you have to say that, yes, we should kill the entire country. You cannot say Islam says we should kill them, but we should not, because then you're arguing with God, right? But you are arguing with God. At this point, you are telling God that, hey, I really want to be a good Muslim, but I cannot. That's what it has come to be. And the combination of the two, means that you are going to, fairly or unfairly, be blamed by the people. By you, I mean the mosque, for all the ills of the society. You're going to be blamed for it. And you're going to have to pay the price for the shortcomings of politics. And the religion and the mosque, the church, is what's going to be blamed and punished. In fact, we see up to this date, the French church is dealing with the problems of centuries ago mistakes made by the French church. That's how restricted they are, how fearful the French are of the church. And
they're still paying the price for rescinding the Edict of Nantes.
Yes,
I mean, that's going way back, but that was where they basically said we're no longer going to tolerate Protestants here. Yeah.
So, by the way, I'm not someone who would come and say that I'm not a progressive. I'm not someone who says that you cannot have any you cannot be informed by your religion for your political behavior, whether as a legislator, as a lawmaker, or as a private citizen who votes. I'm not advocating for that. To begin with, everyone starts politics with and answers political questions with the question of morality. Even when people say you cannot legislate morality, I say that no, even the question of taxes is a question of morality. Whether it's moral to tax people, take people's money away to pay for the poor or not, you're paying for the poor. This is not a technical question. This is a moral question. And I happen to believe that some degree of helping the poor through the state, some degree, do not hang up the call, Mr. Libertarian. Some degree is important, but
we'll have a struggle session about that later.
Yeah, but I believe that some degree is important, but we still are talking about a question of morality, and every question comes down to what is moral. Whether, in fact, the right to life, liberty, and property, these are moral questions that we have answered as such.
Well, I would even say the idea that you can't legislate morality is itself a moral issue, right?
A moral
you're basically
question.
saying,
exactly.
well, you have to let people be free. You have to respect people's ability to make their own choices. Is itself, it's really about a competing moral claim against the attempts to legislate a particular kind of morality.
Absolutely, and religious people immediately go to religion to answer what is moral. And I don't think there's anything wrong with it as individuals. The problem becomes when you take out the debate about what is moral entirely and leave it to the mosque to decide, or leave it to the church to decide, instead of leaving it to polity to make these compromises and have these debates. If someone's Christian and I'm not religious, we have different definitions with some overlap about morality, but we negotiate these in newspaper pages and through the ballot box. But in an Islamic state like Iran or a Christian state, you take out this compromise, you take out this debate, and you leave it to the church to decide, or you leave it to the mosque to decide. And last thing I want to mention is that the other problem is that religious people would say that religion is incorruptible, but nobody can, because it comes from God. But nobody can dispute that the mosque or the church are run by humans and they are corruptible. And nobody can dispute that. But when they preach purity and act corruptly in politics, people see this hypocrisy and get turned off to religion. You cannot come back to me and say that, because this is something American integralists would say, for instance, but that's Islam, it's not the one true religion. Catholicism would be immune from this, to which I respond, have you studied your own religion's history? Have you looked at the present of your church, present form of your church? There's a lot of corruption going on, and this is inevitable in any large human organization, that there will be corruption. But this corruption will be, if all people are going to associate your religion with, be it Islam or Christianity, if it becomes the state religion, especially the fact that however corrupt an organization might be, politics is going to make it more corrupt.
Well, I like to keep reminding people, it was a Catholic intellectual, Lord Acton, who said power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Yeah. Well, talking about because you're talking about the implications here for the sort of the new popular idea among conservatives, this integralist idea that we should integrate church and state. And that's, by the way, you have a piece and I'll link to it along with this podcast, a piece in Providence magazine addressing that particular connection, which is the thing that prompted me to say, hey, I should get Shay onto the podcast and talk about this. And I think it's interesting to look at that parallel to the declining religiosity in America, which really, like in the 1990s, starts to go off a cliff. And one of the causes for it that I would state, and this is probably a little before your time, but I remember as a young man in the 1980s watching the series of televangelist scandals. Now, this isn't a matter of, religion having state power, but it's a matter of it having a lot of influence. And so you had the rise of these television evangelists, these people who had these immensely popular television shows, on cable networks. They had theme parks. They had this vast empires they built up promoting a religious message. And then one after the other, they had this series of lurid scandals that they were involved in. Look up Jimmy Swaggart if you want to, or the last one I remember is in the early 90s, I think it was, that the head of the National Association of Evangelicals was found to be doing methamphetamines with his gay lover, which is 180 degrees opposite of the message that they were saying with great conviction and great sternness from the pulpit. And I think that is that thing that I think to get to the you talked about how everybody draws on their convictions for a source of, everybody needs a source of morality in politics, and they draw on their religious convictions. And I think one of the things that comes out of this, both in the American context and much more so in the Iranian context, is the extent to which these scandals seem to give the lie to the central claim of religion, which is we will provide a basis for morality. That without us, you would have an immoral society. Without us, you would have no foundation for morality. And then when you have, the religious people are given power and influence, and especially political power, and then they go out and act in a way that is flagrantly immoral, it seems to undermine that fundamental argument for why we need religion in the first place.
There is also, by the way, to add to your point, the 1980s were when evangelical church was very badly hit because of those scandals. But then Catholic practice held until 2000s, and then you had the church abuse scandals there, and that's when they
and that scandal hit. And just to underscore that scandal wasn't just that there were priests who were abusing people. It was also that the hierarchy of the church, the people higher up, were running interference for them. They were shielding them, and they were shuffling them around and not really punishing them. So it was like the whole organization was complicit.
And so I want to make another point along those lines, because you said religion dictates morality. So my story is not unfamiliar in Iran, but it is still rare, which is both my parents actually were political prisoners, but my father was quite high up in the Tudeh party, which was the Communist Party. And for the listeners, the apple has fallen far off from the tree. but he came very close to being executed for it. And one of the charges was atheism. And many people who are guilty of high anti-religious crimes, essentially like homosexuality, let's say, they are charged by corruption on the earth, excuse me. And because of that, you can get executed after that. So my father was anti-religious that was one of the charges was atheism and immorality because of that. And he escaped death penalty. This is before I was born. And I grew up watching my dad. And I'm just giving you through the lens of an average Iranian whose family is not religious and is being told that his family, by the state, his family is immoral. And he or she looks to his family or her family. I look up to my dad, and my dad never became rich, not because he couldn't, but because how you become rich in a corrupt society means you have to be very unethical. He was a man who was cheated by many of his partners, many of his workers, many of his subordinates, and he always forgave them and brought them back and gave them a second and third chance. It became almost, it neared being foolish for how much he trusted people and gave them more chances. And whatever my father's flaws, mainly loving Khrushchev was his biggest flaw, and Erich Honecker, the East German Communist Party chairman. But whatever his flaws, nobody could accuse him of being unvirtuous inside his community. So I look up to this man, and then I look up to the corruption of the mosque, and I look up to the corruption of politics controlled by the mosque. And the immediate, and I've been told that this is how religion, Islam looks like. And I'm watching what atheism looks like. My immediate conclusion as a child is that, in fact, Islam is what corrupts you. Atheism is what keeps you pure. And this is the conclusion that many people have had. Many people don't look around finding beauty in Islam and mosque and the purity of it. They look at the biggest symbol of Islam, which is the state, and see nothing but evil and corruption. And then you look around and see actually the best people around you are those who are not religious. Why? Because if you're not religious, it's the same thing that minorities have in most places, that you try to be model citizen. So so nobody attacks you for being a minority. And they are not the minority anymore, but they don't have political power. So people try to be much more moral if they are not religious, to set a good example of what an irreligious person looks like. So in Iran, you look around and you say that, no, actually, it's best not to be religious, because those are the best people.
It's interesting that I'm wondering what there's a direction of cause and effect here, which is that you have you mentioned how that the Islamic regime came into power because there was this tremendous secularization that was going on and liberalization that was going on, and it was a reaction against that. And I think that the same thing is going on with the sort of integralist vogue that's going on in the right now, that I think to some extent it's a reaction to decline in evangelical and decline in Catholic belief, that there's a sense that our viewpoint is slipping away, it's becoming less popular, we're becoming the minority. And it's like this desperate attempt to say, hey, maybe we can reverse that if we could grab some more political power. And, it's the sense that, in a way they, are they becoming secularized because of theocracy, or did they become a theocracy as a reaction against a last-ditch attempt to avoid secularization? And I think maybe it's a feedback loop there in a way.
So in Iran, the secularization, some of it was Iran was a product of its time and the trends of the rest of the world at the time, that societies were secularizing in the post-war era and even pre-post-war era. And Iran was coming out of its medieval practices and becoming secularized, but it was still much more religious at the time than any European or North American country society, and certainly more than it is today. But and I must mention that very few people would actually say that they are not religious. They would not practice religion seriously. They would drink and they would not cover their hair, women, but they would still say that we are Muslim. They would still have some minimal, at least minimal, religious practice and belief. But that also that began to go away too. But when you look at trying to reverse that trend through the means of the state, and people who here want to do it. This is my suspicion, and I open to be proven wrong, but many of the but a large reason for this trend of secularism in the United States is because of the association of political movements with religious movements, the overlap of the two. So it's not quite having a state religion, but it's the intense association between politics and religion that is causing secularization. Because even if you do not have an established religion, over involvement in politics requires compromises, and that becomes a problem for the church. And I mentioned in the piece that you brought up that I'm not talking about, I used to be very hostile to religion because I grew up in Iran, and you have to be hostile to religion if you grow up in Iran. And coming to the United States, I became very, very, very pro-religion, even though I'm not religious myself. And I see how good religion could be. And I don't say this as someone who hates religion. I say this as someone who's a friend of a pious society, that the church is hurting itself and it's hurting the society around us by and the religious and the politicization of the church, I should say, not the church. The politicization of the church is hurting everyone by causing this decline, and further integration will only exacerbate this rise of secularism and add to our problems.
I want to go back to Iran for just a moment, which is that you mentioned, the compromises they make of this tape that was, or this information that was released about, people inside the regime admitting, yes, we've made all these compromises already. Is that a sign? I know that when the Soviet Union collapsed, one of the signs was of that imminent collapse, or one of the causes of it was that you had people within the system, people high up within the system, who basically no longer believed in the system anymore. That they had themselves become disillusioned. Is that happening in Iran? What do you think the implications of all this are for the future of the Islamic regime there? I know optimism has a poor track record. So
especially in the Middle East, whether they are becoming disillusioned. I think that they're becoming disillusioned quite the same way that the communists became disillusioned, which is so it's a mistake to look back at what happened in the Soviet Union and think that they became disillusioned with Marxism, Leninism, or with Marxism, but it was more that implementation of Marxism. Even Gorbachev says that I never wanted things to go as they did. I wanted there to be a Soviet Union, just in a different way. And I think they're becoming disillusioned the same way that the current format of the Islamic Republic is the problem. We can't save the Islamic Republic by reforming it. This is something many of them are saying. And the problem is that there's an old guard which is against reform, led by Khamenei himself. And
also, we mentioned the corruption, and the corruption is it's financial corruption, that's economic corruption. It's people abusing the laws to seize wealth and seize money. So there's a strong financial interest they have in they lose out a lot personally by
that is actually power. That is actually quite an important point, because Soviet Union was corrupt by our standards, but by autocratic standards, it was actually not that corrupt. Russia today is far worse in comparison to the Soviet Union. I'm not saying that Soviet Union was anything like American politics, lacking on the low level of corruption in Norway, but it was much better than Iran is today. It was much better than China is today. It's much better than Russia is today, or Venezuela. So on the corruption index, it was actually Brezhnev didn't have billions of dollars. Like Khamenei's empire is estimated to have up to $200 billion in wealth. Or look at Chinese oligarchs or Russian oligarchs. Soviet Union didn't have something like that. So corruption is actually a greater guardrail, and corruption is both what people hate about these regimes, but it's also part of the immune system, because it encourages people to defend the regime. You have more stakes to lose. Now, having said this, corruption is also causing issues within the regime itself, because you go through the transcript and there's a lot of bringing up the elite corruption by the elite themselves. And how high you are in the ranks has a direct correlation with how corrupt you are. And this pisses off the lower ranks, obviously, who are not as rich, or many of them are idealists. They join the core and remain not corrupt or not too corrupt. So they see that gap even within the core of the regime, and they hate it. And the second is the disillusionment. In the transcripts, it's around 50-something people in that meeting, and 46 of them or 45 of them speak. And there's a huge gap. There is a minority who's defending the current practice, and there's a majority who's saying we need reform. The minority is saying that we don't need reform. The majority is saying that we see how awful the morale in the forces, the units in our command. They're all sympathetic with the people. We are sympathetic with our units and by proxy with the people. And the other ones are saying that, the minority is saying that, no, our units are doing great. It's your leadership problem that the morale is low. Now, if you look at who's saying what, those who are calling for reform, the majority, they're all commanders of units that are not elite, one, and two, they're in charge of domestic oppression, beating up fellow Iranians. Those who are saying that, no, all is fine, it's your problem, are elite unit commanders like the Quds Force, the Aerospace, which receive a lot of money, and they don't go out to beat the people. So there is absolutely that disillusionment among the rank and file and the commanders of the rank and file forces. One guy says, this is actually amazing. He says, I was fighting in Syria. There was an officer who fought next to me in Syria. He loved Khamenei so much. He loves Khamenei so much before during the fight against the Islamic State. He would put Khamenei's picture in his pocket, knowing that if captured, and if they saw that picture, they would know he's Iranian and Shiite and kill him immediately. He still did it because he loves Khamenei so much. He hasn't shown up to work for the past week. I go and ask where he is, why he's not showing up to work. It turns out that he's going to sit at the door of Evin prison, because his wife has been arrested at Evin prison on IRGC's order that he serves.
Wow.
So yes, there is disillusionment, not just by the rank and file, but also by the commanders of rank and file, because they work for them. Another guy says, my chief of staff didn't show up for a week. I go to his house to grab him and bring him. I see that his father is very sick. And my chief of staff to a 06 or 07, like at least a brigadier general in the United States, or maybe a colonel, or maybe even a major general. Says, my chief of staff has been not showing up to work, going to do manual work, so he can pay for his sick father. So the chief of staff is absolutely disillusioned, but so is the commander now, right? Because however, it's very difficult to see this as a human, and however corrupt and however ideological you are, you cannot see this and say something is not wrong, that everything is fine on a human level.
One last question, which is, there's this reaction against the Islamic regime. Does Iran have a secular alternative? And maybe the other question is, do we?
Yes, Iran has no alternative but secular alternative at this point, because, as I mentioned, the largest faith in Iran is still a minority, it's still a third of the people. So the only political force in Iran today that is a religious political force is the Sunnis, actually, especially in south west near Pakistan border. But they're significant force. Iran has the only alternative Iran has is, in fact, a very good one, which is pluralism. Iran is hugely divided along ethnic lines, and by divided I don't mean that politically divided necessarily. I mean that just geographically divided along ethnic lines. And the only two ways that you can keep the country together are, one, extreme oppression against these minorities so they will not secede, or two, having pluralism that gives them maybe special rights, maybe not, but certainly political rights through being a voting bloc. But Iran doesn't have an Islamist future because demographics are against them. At least it doesn't have for now. Religion can always come back, right? Okay. But under the current circumstances, it doesn't.
All right. Well, thanks so much for coming on to share this this insight and join this discussion. And of course, the writer's code is I have to give you an opportunity to plug your Substack.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I write a Substack. The title of it is the Russia-Iran File. And I must mention that my training is actually in NATO and Russian military, but I grew up in Iran, so I do both. And the URL is just Shay Khatiri, my name, shaykhatiri.substack.com, and you can easily find me.
Definitely. All right. Well, thanks so much for coming on and talking about this.
Thank you. Thank you, Rob.
I'm Rob Trzcinski. My guest today has been Shay Khatiri, who is a senior policy analyst with the Jewish Institute for National Security of America, also a Daily Beast columnist, and he just plugged his Substack, which you can also check out. If you enjoyed this conversation, you can also find more discussion about the ideas at the basis of a free society at symposium.substack.com. Please like us on YouTube if you're watching us there, or subscribe to us on your favorite podcasting platform. And thank you for joining the conversation.